On August 13, 2018, a pregnant woman walked through her front door for the last time. Her doorbell camera recorded every second. She had no idea what was waiting for her inside. Within hours, her husband would go on live television, begging the public to help find his missing family. He would say all the right things. He would look into the camera with tears in his eyes and say he just wanted them back. But there was one problem. A neighbor's security camera had already recorded what really happened, and it told a very different story. This is the case of Chris and Shanann Watts, one of the most disturbing family murders in modern American history. Not because of how it happened, but because of how perfectly normal everything looked right up until the end. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand who Shanann Watts was. She was 34 years old. Originally from New Jersey, she had moved to Frederick, Colorado with her husband Chris in 2012. They bought a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of street where kids ride bikes and neighbors wave at each other. Shanann was a saleswoman for a company called Lavelle. She sold health products online and was active on social media every single day. Her Facebook page was like a window into what looked like the perfect life. Smiling family photos, videos of birthday parties, posts about date nights with her husband. She had two daughters, Bella, who was 4 years old, and Celeste, who everyone called Cece, who was 3. Both girls had big brown eyes and bright smiles. Shanann posted videos of them constantly, dancing, laughing, playing with their dad. And she was 15 weeks pregnant with a baby boy. She had already picked out his name, Nico Lee Watts. Her husband Chris was 33. He worked as an operator at Anadarko Petroleum, an oil and gas company. He monitored equipment at remote well sites across northeastern Colorado. To everyone who knew him, Chris was the quiet one, the nice guy, the kind of man who never raised his voice and always helped his neighbors. He coached his daughters. He smiled in every photo. He seemed like the definition of a good father and a devoted husband. But people who knew the couple well noticed something had shifted in the summer of 2018. Chris started working out obsessively. He lost weight. He changed how he dressed. He seemed distracted, distant. Shanann noticed it too. In private text messages to her friends, she wrote that something felt different. She said Chris was pulling away. He wouldn't hug her. He wouldn't touch her. She said it felt like he didn't love her anymore. She was right. But the reason was worse than she imagined. In June of 2018, Chris began an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger. She was 28. She worked at the same company as Chris, in the environmental department. Chris told Nicole that his marriage was already over. He said he and Shanann were going through a separation. He told her the divorce papers were practically signed. None of that was true. In reality, Shanann was desperately trying to save their marriage. She planned a trip to North Carolina to give Chris space. She wrote him long, emotional letters. She bought him a book about fixing relationships. Meanwhile, Chris was spending every free moment with Nicole. They went to restaurants. They went to museums. They spent weekends together while Shanann was out of town with the girls. Nicole later told police that she had searched online for wedding dresses and how much it cost to marry someone from another state. She was planning a future with a man who was still very much married. And Chris was planning something else entirely. Phone records show that on the night of August 11th, Chris went to Nicole Kessinger's apartment. They spent the evening together. He left around 11 p.m. At the same time, Shanann was on a plane flying home from a work trip in Arizona. She had been gone for 6 weeks, first visiting family in North Carolina, then the business trip. She was exhausted. She was emotional, and she was hoping that the time apart had helped. Her friend and colleague Nicole Atkinson picked her up from the airport. During the drive home, Shanann talked about her marriage. She said she still loved Chris. She said she wanted to make it work for the kids. Nicole dropped Shanann off at 1:48 in the morning on August 13th. The Vivint doorbell camera recorded Shanann walking up to the front door. She was carrying her suitcase in one hand and her phone in the other. She unlocked the door and went inside. The house was dark. Chris was already in bed. The girls were asleep in their rooms. What happened over the next 3 hours would remain a secret for months. At 5:17 a.m., a neighbor's security camera recorded something unusual. Chris Watts backed his work truck into the garage. This was not something he normally did. Over the next several minutes, the camera captured Chris walking back and forth between the house and the truck. He made 3 separate trips, loading something into the truck bed. At 5:46 a.m., Chris closed the garage door, got into his truck, and drove away. No one else left the house. No one else arrived. Shanann never walked out that door. Chris drove 45 minutes east to a remote oil site called Survey 319. It was a place he visited regularly for work. A barren patch of land with nothing but oil tanks and dirt roads. No cameras, no people, no witnesses. Or so he thought. He buried Shanann's body in a shallow grave near one of the tanks. Then he took Bella and Celeste and pushed their small bodies through 8-inch openings at the top of 2 crude oil tanks. Then he texted his boss to say he was on site and started his workday. At around 8 a.m., Shanann missed a scheduled doctor's appointment. Her obstetrician's office called. No answer. By mid-morning, her friend Nicole Atkinson started texting her, then calling. No response. This was extremely unusual. Shanann was glued to her phone. She responded to messages within minutes. She never missed appointments, especially not while pregnant. By 12 p.m., Nicole was worried enough to drive to the house. She rang the doorbell. She knocked on the door. She looked through the windows. Nothing. Shanann's car was in the garage. Her shoes were by the door, but no one answered. Nicole called Chris at work. He said Shanann had gone to a friend's house with the kids after an emotional conversation that morning. He said he was sure she'd be back soon. Nicole didn't believe him. She called the police. A Frederick police officer arrived at the Watts home around 1:40 p.m. Chris left work and met him there. Chris unlocked the door and invited the officer inside. Everything looked clean and orderly. Almost too orderly. Shanann's purse was on the kitchen counter. Her phone was wedged between the couch cushions. Her car keys were on the hook. Her sandals were by the door. Her medication, which she needed for a condition called lupus, was untouched. What kind of pregnant woman leaves her house without her phone, her purse, her car, her shoes, or her medication? Chris told the officer that he and Shanann had a conversation that morning about their marriage. He said it was emotional but not violent. He said she told him she was going to take the kids to a friend's house. He said he left for work around 5:30, and that was the last time he saw them. The officer took notes, but something didn't add up.
Chris Watts, WATTS.
What's going on right now around your house?
Right now you got K9 units, the sheriff's department. Everybody's they're doing their best right now to figure out
That same evening, a reporter from Denver 7 News showed up at the house. Chris agreed to speak on camera. What followed was one of the most analyzed interviews in true crime history. Chris stood on his porch and talked about his missing family. He said he missed them. He said the house felt empty without them. He said he wanted everyone to come together and help bring them home. But his body language told a different story. He rocked back and forth. He couldn't keep his hands still. He smiled at strange moments. He used past tense when talking about Shanann and the girls, as if they were already gone. Millions of people would later watch this interview and see exactly what investigators saw. A man who already knew his family was never coming home. While Chris was speaking to reporters, detectives were already reviewing the neighbor's security footage. Nathaniel Trinastich had a Vivint surveillance system that covered his driveway and part of the street. When police asked if his camera might have caught anything, he immediately offered to help. Together, they sat down in Trinastich's living room and pulled up the footage from the early morning of August 13th. And there it was, 5:17 a.m., Chris backing his truck into the garage, multiple trips between the house and the truck, loading, closing the garage, driving away. Chris was in the room when this footage played. The body camera on the police officer captured his reaction. He fidgeted, he paced, he rubbed the back of his neck. He tried to explain every movement. He said he was loading work tools. He said he always backed into the garage. But the damage was done. The police now had a timeline, and it didn't match a single word Chris had said. The next morning, August 15th, Chris was brought in for a polygraph test at the Frederick Police Department. Before the test, the examiner asked Chris routine questions about the disappearance. Chris stuck to his story. She left with the kids. He went to work. The polygraph results came back. Chris failed. The examiner told him the results showed deception. Chris's face dropped. He asked what that meant. The examiner said it meant he wasn't telling the truth. Then investigators from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation took over. They played a different strategy. They brought in Chris's father, Ronnie, and let them talk alone in the interrogation room. Cameras were rolling the entire time. In that room, speaking to his own father, Chris changed his story for the first time. He told his dad that he had strangled Shanann, but he claimed it was because he caught her hurting the children. He said he saw her smothering Celeste on the baby monitor and that he snapped. It was a lie designed to make him look like a grieving father who lost control. Investigators didn't believe a word of it, but they had what they needed: a confession. Chris Watts was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Search teams were dispatched to the Survey 319 oil site immediately. Using GPS data from Chris's work truck, investigators pinpointed his exact movements that morning. The truck had stopped at a specific location near the oil batteries, the kind of equipment Chris serviced regularly as part of his job. Shanann's body was found buried in a shallow grave in the dirt. She was face down. She was still wearing the clothes she had on when she came home from Arizona. Bella and Celeste were found inside 2 separate oil tanks. The openings at the top of those tanks were only 8 inches wide. Investigators had to use specialized equipment to recover their bodies. The medical examiner confirmed that Shanann had been strangled. Bella and Celeste had been smothered. The unborn baby, Miko, died with his mother. In November of 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to 9 criminal counts, including 5 counts of first-degree murder. As part of a plea deal, the death penalty was taken off the table. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms, plus 2 additional life sentences, without the possibility of parole. Ever. But the full truth didn't come out until February of 2019, when investigators visited Chris in prison for a follow-up interview. This time, he told them what really happened. He said that when Shanann came home that night, they argued about the affair and about their marriage. Then they went to bed. While Shanann was lying face down, Chris climbed on top of her and strangled her with both hands. She fought back, she kicked, she tried to breathe, but he didn't stop. It took about 4 minutes. The girls were still asleep. Chris loaded Shanann's body into the truck first. Then he woke up the girls and put them in the back seat. Bella asked where her mother was. Chris told her Shanann was sick. He drove 45 minutes with his 2 living daughters sitting behind him. When they arrived at the oil site, he smothered Celeste first with a blanket while she sat in the truck. Then he walked to the oil tank and pushed her body inside. Bella watched the whole thing. She said, "Daddy, no! Please don't do to me what you just did to Cece." He smothered her too, and pushed her into the second tank. Then he buried Shanann in the dirt nearby and drove to the next work site on his schedule. The case of Chris Watts is not about a monster hiding in the dark. That's what makes it so terrifying. It's about a man who looked completely normal, a man who smiled for family photos and coached his daughter's sports team, a man whose neighbors said they never heard a single argument from that house. Shanann documented their entire life online, thousands of photos, hundreds of videos, and in every single one, there is no sign of what was coming. The only reason this case was solved in 48 hours is because of technology. A doorbell camera that captured Shanann's last moments, a neighbor's security system that recorded Chris loading his truck, GPS data that tracked his movements, phone records that mapped his lies, a polygraph that caught his deception. Without those cameras, without that data, Chris Watts might have gotten away with it. Chris Watts is currently serving his sentence at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. He will spend the rest of his life in prison. Nicole Kessinger changed her name and disappeared from public life. She was never charged with any crime. Investigators found no evidence that she knew about Chris's plan. Shanann's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Chris. They have since become advocates for domestic violence awareness. The Watts family home in Frederick, Colorado, sat empty for over a year before it was finally sold. Neighbors said they couldn't drive past it without thinking about what happened inside. Bella was 4 years old. Celeste was 3. Nico was never born. 3 children who never got the chance to grow up because their father decided his new life was worth more than theirs. If this story stayed with you, consider sharing this video, not for views or likes, but because some stories deserve to be heard. Subscribe if you want to see more cases like this one, and leave a comment telling me which case you want to see next, because there are more stories like this one, and the cameras are always watching.